Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. I hope you are having a good Super Tuesday. That is right, we are here on today, March 3rd, otherwise known as Super Tuesday, the day in which nearly a third of the United States goes out to the primaries, grabs a sweater or a hot chocolate, depending on the state you're in, and casts their vote for the nomination in the Democratic Party. We are happy, more than happy, obliged to bring you all the coverage that you need to sift through the theater and the kabuki and the hokey pokey and the grandstanding to actually understand what is going on in the Democratic primary. What is happening to the Democratic Party overall as well? You might be thinking that this race is all about Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, Joe Sanders, Bernie, Biden, Biden, Bernie, 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 and you would be correct indeed. The media has explicitly made it so that this is a race between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. And for good reason. If you look at the polls in New Hampshire in the primary, you look at Iowa and you look at Nevada, you might, and if you're a gambler, you might be thinking, I'm putting my money on that horse named Bernie Sanders. But if you were there long enough to see South Carolina, you now might be thinking, considering that Joe Biden came away with 50% of the vote in a state in which 60% of the Democratic electorate is African American, and he was endorsed by the House Majority Whip, James Clyburn, Representative James Clyburn. Now you might be thinking, ooh, yes, 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 we finally have a race. Now we are cooking with fire. And of course, as we inch our way to the goal of eventually making sure that we have an electable president in order to take out Donald Trump, you must be thinking, well, why are we still talking about Bernie if Pete Buttigieg, who just dropped out, has endorsed Joe Biden? Amy Klobuchar, who has just dropped out, just endorsed Joe Biden. Of course, former Senate Majority and Minority Whip Harry Reid just endorsed Joe Biden. James Clyburn has endorsed Joe Biden. And our old friend from Texas, Mr. Beto O'Rourke, has also endorsed Joe Biden. So we've got Joe Biden in this corner at 78 years old, and we've got Bernie Sanders in this corner at 78 years old, and then we've got Donald Trump somewhere off in Rainbow Road at 73 years old, and boy, is this race really heating up. So now I'd like to turn to a clip in which you see both Pete Buttigieg, Mr. Mayor Pete Buttigieg, and of course Amy Klobuchar, the senator from Minnesota, formally endorse Mr. Joe Biden. Hey, let's go, Joe, and play.
That I'm delighted to endorse and support Joe Biden for president. I'm looking for a president who will draw out what is best in each of us. And I'm encouraging everybody who was part of my campaign to join me because we have found that leader in Vice President, soon to be President, Joe Biden.
We need to unite our party and our country, and to do it not just with our words, but with our actions. It is up to us, all of us, to put our country back together, to heal this country, and then to build something even greater. I believe we can do this together. And that is why today I am ending my campaign and endorsing Joe Biden for president.
Okay, so there are clearly two ways to think about what's going on this primary season, right? We've got the Democratic primaries before South Carolina, and then we've got the Democratic primaries after South Carolina. You see, going into Iowa, it was pretty clear that Senator Sanders had a strong grip on a large swath of the Democratic Party, and it seemed like he was an up and comer, especially for those of us that remember 2016, where you had people that were, pretty much decidedly saying that he was not going to get the nomination. However, now we're in a situation where Joe Biden, the person who has been polling pretty poorly within his own party, in fact, gaining no delegate votes in New Hampshire or in Iowa, is now someone who has come back into the race, taking 50% of the South Carolina Democratic electorate, which means that this is obviously, the media is right here. This is obviously a race between Senator Sanders and former Vice President Joe Biden. Now, here's where things get, of course, really interesting, because this is the core, the rift of the Democratic Party. You have two people one's 78 years old, one's 79 years old, who've both spent a lifetime on the Hill in Washington, the Golden City on a Hill, who are both unwilling to relinquish their run for presidency. You are not going to have Senator Sanders say, I'm just going to give up. This is his last shot. Similarly, this is also Joe Biden's last shot. After this point, if they were to run again, they would be in their 80s. They would literally be octogenarian people running for president. So this is both of their last shot. And right now, it looks like Joe Biden is definitively going to win the South. He's going to win Alabama. He's leading in Alabama, according to the NBC live stream coverage. He's winning in Kentucky. He's winning in Tennessee. He's going to get Georgia. He's going to get Florida. He's already got South Carolina. He just got North Carolina. Whereas Bernie is doing well really in just his home state of Vermont. I believe he did well in New Hampshire, so right next to his home state, Nevada and Colorado. So clearly what's going on is that this is a race between, and this is really just actually an ideological battle going on between people who are considered establishment in the Democratic Party and then people who are considered progressive. However, I think we can all admit that the way people have been shoveling tons of money into this election and the way people have been treating each other and attacking each other in debates, that it's not really in the true spirit of progressivism. And really, that's because what's going on is that this is about defeating Donald Trump. This is not necessarily about only putting forth a progressive agenda. This is about beating Donald Trump, which is fair. If you are a Democrat right now, then likely you are thinking, I'm either going to have to pick between Joe Biden or I'm going to have to pick between Bernie Sanders. And it seems likely that the state of California is going to go for Senator Sanders. However, the entire South, as we can see here on this map, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Alabama, North Carolina, South Carolina, all going for Biden. Who's going for Sanders? We have Utah, Colorado, Vermont, New Hampshire. Undecided, Texas, California, Maine. And then Biden also winning up in Michigan, where he just was. And it's likely that he will win Minnesota as well, and Indiana, considering Pete Buttigieg endorsed him from Indiana and Amy Klobuchar endorsed him from Minnesota. So let's look at the polls here. Let's see. Let's turn up the volume just a little bit. We've got Biden with 323 delegates.
Remember, 1,991 delegates helps one secure the Democratic nomination. And at this hour, Biden leads with 323 and Sanders just changed, 326. See? More delegates being awarded as we speak. We'll be watching California as the night picks up. Want to bring in our panel here. And let's talk about what has been this seismic shift and the other candidates, truly. We've talked about a big night for Biden, still could be much more ahead in terms of Sanders, but Elizabeth Warren. Terry, you worked on the Rubio campaign. You know what that discussion is like that goes on. Is it time to exit? Do you stay in? What's happening, do you think, inside the Warren campaign?
Well, it's a tough decision, and it's a very personal one. But at the same time, look, the establishment of the Democrat Party wants to keep her in. She might have been the greatest gift to Joe Biden tonight by helping him win in a state, or it looks like he may win in a state like Massachusetts, peeling away votes from Sanders in state after state. She may have given him a victory in multiple states. So there's not going to be a lot of pressure by the establishment, by the donor class of the party to push her out.
What about, though, personal reputation?
Now, of course, what's obviously interesting that's really going on, of course, is that whereas in 2016, you had many Republicans who were all running, and then you had Donald Trump, who was picking up, winning in primaries 30%, 31%, 32%, 33%, 35% here and there, because there were so many people who were all running for president that decided that they wanted to run all the way through. They wanted to see it through. Ted Cruz was not going to abdicate, and neither was Marco Rubio, and neither was Herman Cain, and neither was Mitt Romney, or Mitt Romney wasn't running. But in any case, what is politically smart, in my opinion, but very interesting ideologically, is that what's going on this time in the 2020 primary season with the Democratic Party is that the people who have decided that they ideologically might have some small nuanced differences, but generally have the same common enemy, the lunch lady, Donald Trump, then they have decided, I'm going to step out of the race, I'm going to back out, and I'm going to endorse Joe Biden. So basically, at this point, what it looks like is Michael Bloomberg versus Bernie Sanders versus Joe Biden and the entire rest of the Democratic Party. Mind you, except for Elizabeth Warren, but she's not doing so well like she was in October. In October, Elizabeth Warren was doing very well. She was getting the first question in the debates. We've had 10 debates so far. Our next one scheduled for March 15th. And it seemed like she really had a meteoric rise. But now she's polling 5, 6%, 13% here in Oklahoma, her home state. 13% in your own home state is not really that impressive. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is probably going to go ahead and win it, securing nearly 37% of the electorate in someone else's home state, which I think is impressive, but I also don't think could have happened unless James Clyburn and Pete Buttigieg and Beto O'Rourke and Amy Klobuchar had endorsed him as well as Harry Reid. So I think that it's interesting that at this point, you're going to have not just a race between Biden and Sanders. It's much, much more than that. This is a Thunderdome-style cage match where you've got the entire Democratic Party behind Joe Biden just about, and then you've got a much smaller group of the party behind Bernie Sanders. And both Biden and Sanders, another lurking variable, are pretty much getting up there in age. The clock is ticking. They're both approaching 80, and they are unwilling to just step aside because this is the last shot to run for both of them. And this is a golden opportunity. However, I have to say, they just might spectacularly split the party in 2 or 3 and give Donald Trump the election. There are also the independents that we don't know about yet. So we have to see how independents feel about Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. Let's go ahead and turn up the volume a little bit and tune into some of this election coverage.
I mean, we're in for perhaps 3 more months of combat.
Yeah, but an interesting piece on that is Bernie Sanders kept winning. And when I look at, for example, March 10th, 3 out of those 5 states in 2016 were caucuses. Those are states where Bernie would have blown Hillary out. I don't think that's as possible this time. And it's ironic to me because Bernie Sanders was so influential in this change commission that made these changes. I think it might have really hurt him.
Which, to your point on Minnesota, which was a caucus, but this time it was a primary.
Totally
he won. Sanders did last time when it was a caucus, lost when it was a primary.
And for Democrats like you, it's just sweet revenge.
Look, I think it is great that we're having more voters participating in the primary. That's what we're seeing tonight.
It doesn't hurt that Sanders is now suffering
The other
from changes he
interesting
wanted.
data tonight that we learned from the exit polls is that Democratic voters are angry and that the top thing that they want is someone who can choose President Trump. And in many of these states, they overwhelmingly said what, John?
They said, we want Joe Biden. You know, if you look at the other polls, it shows that Sanders and Biden basically match up against Trump in about the same way. But he has convinced them in these exit polls that those people who care about beating Donald Trump, they have gone overwhelmingly for Joe Biden over Bernie Sanders.
All right, thanks to our panel. We're going to be watching California closely in the minutes ahead as we wait for the polls there to close.
Now, of course, you might be thinking to yourself, what is it about Joe Biden? And obviously, the giant elephant in the room is the difference in experience, right? You see, Bernie Sanders is someone who is in many ways very ideologically interesting, and he has, many, many things in his toolkit, if you will, for his speeches and his rallies, and he's been fairly ideologically consistent over the decades. However, you're talking about someone who went age 0 to 39, not really working, and then won to be the mayor of Burlington in Vermont by 10 votes, and then turned out to be a United States senator, versus someone who has been a senator since the 1970s, and then also the vice president during a pretty turbulent time in world history generally. So you have to sit here and think, maybe it's just that people are not so opposed to Bernie, but in fact, they just admire that Joe Biden has actually been in the hot seat. He knows what it's like to negotiate with Iran. He knows what it's like to negotiate with ISIS. He knows what it's like to talk to China and to talk to South Korea and Australia and the United Kingdom and France and Germany and Japan. And he understands what it takes to actually get things done. And he also understands one key thing that makes him at the same time very unpopular in his party, but also very popular nationally, which is that you do have to reach across the aisle. The idea that you're going to create some purity test that you yourself cannot even pass and enforce that is not a good way to bring more people into your cause. Whereas Joe Biden, time and again, has made the point that you have to be able to reach across the aisle. If you are not able to participate or work within the means that you have, you're never going to actually create change. And that is the difference between someone who, in many cases makes interesting points but has a lot of grievances and someone who's actually been in the hot seat. Now that we're back and we're thinking, okay, well, we've got Biden, who's polling pretty well tonight, although we still don't know about California, which has a lot of delegates. I believe the state of California has 43 delegates, which could that's a substantial amount, which could bring Sanders up. But at the same time, you have to think, why is it that the one thing that makes Biden so popular among national polls makes him sort of lackluster within his own party? Is Joe Biden not in step with the direction of his own party? But at the same time, the people that were just sort of critical of him in debates have now completely abdicated and said that they are fully endorsing Joe Biden. So you have to think, how much of this is theater? How much of this is just we have common enemy politics and we don't want Donald Trump in office? And how much of this is, well, this is my last shot to run, or my only shot to run, so I can't abdicate. So let's see what's going on now. Let's tune in yet again to this wonderful CBS News coverage of the primaries.
Sanders. But the big story
yes, California
is Joe Biden's incredible comeback. As recently as last week, his campaign was on life support after losses in Iowa, New Hampshire,
Indeed.
and Nevada. Well, then he won the South Carolina primary on Saturday, picked up a number of endorsements, used that momentum to propel him to this. States won tonight, 7 states: Virginia, North Carolina, Alabama, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Minnesota, and Tennessee. But don't count Bernie Sanders out. He won 3 states: Colorado, Utah, and his home state of Vermont. And as we said, California, the biggest delegate prize of all, is leaning his way. There are still a couple of states yet to call. You can see Texas there as well. But here's where we stand right now. You need 1,991 to be nominated and win the Democratic nomination. At this hour, Biden is leading, opening up his first lead of this entire primary campaign with 331 delegates. Bernie Sanders at 269. Elizabeth Warren, who is still in this race, trailing Mayor Buttigieg, who dropped out.
You see, Joe Biden is like Rudy. That's what this is what's going on. Joe Biden is Rudy. He is the person who was sitting on the sidelines all along, the person that could do the job, but for some reason you didn't pick on him to do the job. You picked that person last to be on the team. You think that person is very lackluster, but it turns out that person is the person that in the end everybody is going to rally behind in order to get the final touchdown to win the game. Joe Biden is Rudy. As soon as Joe Biden stepped off the sidelines and the tomb opened up and the mummy took off his robes and he came alive again, he swept in like a hawk in one fell swoop, and he took half of South Carolina with him, and he's going to take all of the rest of the South with him, and many places in the Midwest, and many places maybe even on the Eastern Seaboard. Once you get into places like Vermont, Rhode Island, Delaware, New Hampshire, although Delaware it's Scranton, Pennsylvania is where Joe Biden is from, so it's likely he'll get Delaware. He's been a senator from Delaware. But in any case, you might see Bernie, be more competitive with Utah, Colorado, California, maybe Oregon, the West, the Western coast, and then the far Northeast. But generally, Joe Biden is Rudy. Joe Biden came in at the 11th hour, at the very last minute. We're talking December 31, 11:59 p.m. And Joe Biden came in and everybody endorsed him. And Joe Biden just cannot be tackled. And he puts the team on his back and everyone is pushing and pushing. Rudy, 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 until Joe Biden is probably going to get the nomination. Except here's where we come to something that's really interesting. Are the other candidates in this party going to be able to accept the results? A question that was asked of Donald Trump in the 2016 election, because it sounds like Senator Elizabeth Warren is more interested in a contested convention or an open convention. So what's even more interesting is this first past the post where maybe no one wins a majority, but Joe Biden is in the lead, so he's the first past the post. He's the first pony past the post. But at the same time, if you don't get a majority, that means that more than half of the people, even if it's just slight, didn't vote for you. And at that point, there's a reasonable argument for an open convention. So I'm sitting here thinking, I don't know if people are going to be able to accept the results of the nomination. But it's looking to me likely, my earlier forecast, Bernie Sanders gets the nomination. After seeing South Carolina and after seeing Super Tuesday slowly unfold before our eyes, especially as the American South votes in the primaries, I'm now officially switching my prediction for Joe Biden. I think that Joe Biden is going to get the nomination. And if you're Donald Trump, that's a bad thing. See, if you're Donald Trump, you can point to Bernie Sanders and say, this is someone who honeymooned in the Soviet Union, who was talking about nationalizing all the industries in 1970s, who wants the post office to also be your bank. But with Joe Biden, he can't come at him because Joe Biden, frankly, has more experience, not more recently, but more experience, and also in many ways better experiences with more, with better outcomes. So if you're Donald Trump, you're really hoping for Bernie because you can use that dirty S word, socialism, to go ahead and basically tear the whole house down. But now that you have Joe Biden, Mr. Biden, hey, let's go, Joe. Well, now it's going to be a much, much tougher competition. And you're probably also thinking, considering in 2016 that what really helped Trump was that many people didn't show up to vote. You have to be worried that maybe there will be this historic voter turnout that everybody has been talking about that's never happened in history. But who knows, maybe this year is the year that more than half of Americans, who am I kidding? More than a third of Americans decide to vote in a national election. Let's go ahead and tune into this Biden campaign headquarters again. Let's check in. Check-in time.
So he chose this area. The community organizer said that she got an email on Monday morning. And I can tell you this has been very disorganized. As you saw throughout the night tonight, we were told that he was going to come out early. They then spent 2 hours of delaying us. And then quickly, all of a sudden, he took the stage without much warning to any of the media as well and came out. And that's been pretty much the day that we've seen unfold here in the state of California. I can tell you here in California as well, you had almost a quarter of early voters undecided. They had remained undecided. They wanted to see what would happen in South Carolina. We know that early voters had requested those ballots early. Elections office is saying they sent out about 16 million early ballots by mail, but many of those had not been returned. We're also hearing of very long lines at polling places, up to 4 hours in some locations, both here in the Los Angeles area and also in Northern California near San Francisco. So a lot of people waited until the last minute to see how they would vote. And I can tell you the breakdown in voters here in California is also interesting. Obviously, a lot of talk about the Hispanic vote when it came to Bernie Sanders. 30% of Hispanics will make up the Democratic vote here in the state. 14% of Asian voters will come out to vote. Those are record numbers from what is being indicated tonight, a record number of Hispanic and Asian voters. Now, Joe Biden earlier, when he was with Mayor Garcetti, pointed out a few numbers, and this could show the change in tone here in the state of California. He said that he has raised $15 million so far this month. Well, if you look at the calendar, it's still March 3rd. That means that just in 3 days alone, he has boosted the amount of money in his campaign tremendously just this month alone. Of course, California has 415 delegates, and we are in for probably a very long night as people who were already in line will get a chance to vote, and that could take some time, Nora.
So if you're Joe Biden, here's the play. The play is healthcare. Healthcare has consistently been, for at least 10 years now, since 2008 to 2020. Okay, so for the last 12 years, healthcare has really been the number one item in the on the wish list of the Democratic Party. Number one is healthcare. Healthcare, healthcare, healthcare. And if you're Joe Biden, that means you got to promote the Affordable Care Act. You got to talk about providing an option to people. Joe Biden has made it very clear that he wants a public option and he wants the expansion of the Affordable Care Act. And this is really a big point of contention between the Bernie Sanders style Democrats, where it's Medicare for all with some plot twists, and then of course the Joe Biden method, which is more, let's just not really tinker with the system. We'll maybe take on drug manufacturers if I remember to think of it later. And then also we're going to go ahead and provide a public option. And at that point, you must be thinking it's going to come down to the coasts voting for Sanders, and in many places the middle of the country and the South voting for Joe Biden. So if you're Joe Biden right now, your number one play is to talk about healthcare. When you go to rallies now, continue to talk about healthcare. And you notice this during the debates. Whenever healthcare is brought up, Joe Biden comes alive again. The eyes go wide open like an owl. And he goes, I wrote the damn bill. I wrote the damn bill. So if you're Joe Biden right now, your play is absolutely to talk about healthcare. Not only is healthcare a crisis, but also there was a golden opportunity in 2016 after 8 years of trash talking from many people in the Republican Party to reform healthcare, come up with a new system, eradicate Obamacare, whatever, and it was a complete flop. So if you're Joe Biden, you're thinking now is the time to get on your haunches like a hawk, circling over a field. And just when the minute is right, you swoop down and you come in with your healthcare plan. And if Joe Biden can manage to come in with a pretty decent healthcare plan, and he can manage to pick up some independents, some suburban voters, some urban voters, some African American voters, some Caucasian voters, some union voters, some college educated voters, then he might find himself pretty well positioned to win the presidency, which he's been saying all along. And according to many polls, including a recent NBC poll, it does seem to be the case. So in this Thunderdome style primary season, there are several goals going on. But the two most important factors are who can beat Donald Trump and who can do the job. Now, for a while, Mr. Mayor Pete thought that because he won 8,000 votes in Indiana, he was able to do the job, but he is now on the Biden vote. I think that's a pretty good politically smart move for him, because today when he did endorse Joe Biden, it seemed pretty clear that Biden was saying, hat, wink, nod, I'm going to give you some position within my administration. So politically, you have to think in 2016, the Republicans were very fractured, but there was no point where they decided to drop out and then endorse Donald Trump. They said, there's no way we're going to do that. But then Donald Trump won. Everybody was surprised, including Trump himself. And then now you have some people who are Trumpers or never Trumpers or sometimes Trumpers, and people who play the game good Trump, bad Trump. But with the Democratic Party, you literally have almost the entire party behind Joe Biden versus Senator Sanders. And these two people are meeting right in the middle. And it's emblematic of the rift that's going on between the Democratic Party, because it's either you are an establishment voter who supports war and supports, harsh border measures and supports, capitalism, or you're a progressive who wants to really overhaul things and quickly. And there are some people who are thinking, where do I fit in the situation? Because I want change, but I don't want large-scale disruption. I want to be able to know that my school is going to be there next week and I can go to the grocery store and get food. But also I'm kind of having trouble affording things because things are expensive. And that is something that is also another general topic of interest, the cost of living, especially for someone like Senator Sanders, who, to his credit, has been quite ideologically consistent about something like cost of living, healthcare, immigration for decades. Now, let's tune back to our friends here at CBS News covering Super Tuesday.
And he's not winning on his main argument, which is I can beat Donald Trump. So he's behind both Biden and Sanders. So he's spending a lot of money. He's less popular than he was before he spent all the money. And the signature case that he's making is the one that he comes in third in of the top three candidates. That's really not a recipe for success.
I think it was key for Bernie Sanders to show up because a lot of Democrats, especially Latino Democrats, feel that they are being ignored, that their vote is being taken for granted by Democratic candidates. And he showed up. And there was such a good relationship between him and young Latinos that they call him Tio Bernie, which means Uncle Bernie. Sure. They say he reminds them of their grandfather, and of course they think their grandfathers are very wise.
Well, so why don't they call him Abuelito Bernie then? That's right, grandfather?
Right, it should.
Abuelo Bernie does work.
You know what? This is reminiscent of 2016, though, in that what we saw a lot of is that earned media matters so much more than paid. I mean, it's whether you're in the state or not, or whether you have an organization or not, it's earned media that matters.
All right, Terry, thank you.
And that's obviously so true. If you think about it, Mike Bloomberg just came into the race because he was able to spend $300 million in 1 month. Tom Steyer was able to take all of his previously made big oil money and dump it and spend tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars in South Carolina for TV ads, for radio ads, just so that he could basically wind up flopping. Mike Bloomberg has had several times to explain himself at this point. On Monday, it was known that his staff confirmed that he's going to stay in the race, and yet he's been doing particularly poorly, and he's really taken a beating from some of these candidates. Let's go ahead and zoom in on the Democratic primary results here, and we're going to go ahead and read it state by state. Let's see if we can look. We see Alabama, 36 reporting. Is that 52? There we go. Perfect. Alabama. Joe Biden won. 52 delegates available. 36% of precincts reporting. Let's move to Arkansas. Midwest. Again, Joe Biden. 31% reporting. 31 delegates total available. 31% precincts reporting. California. California is an enigma, very interesting, but leading toward Bernie. So we'll move on to Colorado, where Bernie did win with 30% of precincts reporting with a total of 66 delegates available. And then we move back to the northeastern seaboard of the United States with Maine, 44% of precincts reporting with 24 delegates possible available. Massachusetts with 39% of precincts reporting. Joe Biden is leading, but we don't know if he's officially won yet, with 91 delegates available. The state of Minnesota, just went up. Joe Biden won, just switched. Joe Biden won. 70% of precincts reporting with 91 delegates available. Joe Biden wins again. Let's go to Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar's home state, where Amy Klobuchar did just endorse Joe Biden. Joe Biden has won with nearly 3/4 of the precincts reporting, 75 delegates available. Now we go down to North Carolina. Joe Biden won 90% of precincts reporting with 110 delegates available. So that's North Carolina and South Carolina, pair of Carolinas. We move to Oklahoma. Interestingly, Elizabeth Warren's home state. That's right, Senator Warren's home state, where 100% of precincts have reported, and Joe Biden finished with 19 delegates, nearly 40% of the vote, with Sanders following with 25% of the vote. Then Michael Bloomberg with 13.9% of the vote, just slightly ahead of Elizabeth Warren with only 13.4% of the vote in her own home state. In her own home state. You might be thinking, if you're Elizabeth Warren, at this point, it's smarter to just drop out and then endorse Joe Biden and hope that maybe you become Secretary of Education. We move on to Tennessee. Joe Biden won, 89% of precincts reporting, 64 delegates available. We move on to Texas with 35% of precincts reporting. Bernie Sanders is leading. That's interesting. But we have Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden nearly neck and neck, with Senator Sanders with 28.6% of the vote and Joe Biden with Bernie with 28.6% of the vote and Joe Biden with 26.7% of the vote, with Joe Biden just slightly one more delegate, 23 to 22. Okay, and then we went through 35% of precincts reporting, so we'll see how that finishes up. Interesting move for Texas. We move down to Utah, where Bernie Sanders has won with, I believe, 29 delegates available. 52% of the precincts reporting. Then we move to Vermont, Bernie Sanders' home state, with 96, nearly every percent of the precincts reporting with 16 delegates available. And then finally, of the 14 states, Virginia. All said and done, Joe Biden won, 99 delegates available, 100% of precincts are reported. So, interesting move for Texas to lead toward Bernie. I personally thought Texas was more likely to lean toward Joe Biden, especially because Joe Biden already picked up Oklahoma, basically, which sits right on top of Texas, as well as Alabama, which is not too far away. However, Bernie Sanders did manage to pick up Utah and Nevada, so there's something to be said that maybe he has some pull in the West. So it'll be interesting to see what actual California voters have responded to in this poll or survey they have done here at CBS. But I think that it will be most likely a state that goes to Bernie Sanders, which will be a pretty good rebuttal to Joe Biden winning the Carolinas. Well, if you're still with us so far in the episode, first I want to go ahead and say thank you. We can't make this possible without viewers who are interested and curious and wanting to understand the world around them. So I want to go ahead and take this opportunity to say thank you, and also to invite you to subscribe, to like this, to share this video on your social media, to talk about it with your family, talk about these ideas, think about these ideas, do some of your own research. And if you're really feeling generous, maybe you can even click the link in our description for our Patreon page. So let's take a look at this interesting chart here, which really shows that the Democratic race has not been some tortoise and hare race where slow and steady wins the race unless you're Biden. But instead, it's been a series of peaks and valleys for different candidates as the months have rolled by. I remember July in 2019 when it seemed like Elizabeth Warren was just finally starting to really pick up. As we start approaching July, we see the brown tannish line is Senator Warren, and you can see her starting to rise. 8.5 to 9 to 7 to 9 to 11, a huge jump. 11 to 12 keeps rising, getting closer and closer to Sanders, as Biden has sort of regular drops and then recoveries. But you see Warren and Sanders competing for the progressive lane neck and neck until we get into August and we see Elizabeth Warren take off, and we see Senator Sanders stay pretty much where he is, comfortable between 14, 15, 16 points. So if you're sitting here and you're thinking, I remember August, it seemed like in August my bet would have been Elizabeth Warren gets the nomination. But now as we slowly, the summer goes, the hot days, the days become shorter, the nights become longer, the wind becomes cooler, and Sanders maintains his rise and starts to recover, whereas Warren faces a pretty steep drop you can see there in the fall of 2019. Warren continues to come back up, but look at that drop. From about August through September, September was basically the month of just falling and falling for Senator Warren, whereas Senator Sanders slowly, gradually kept hold of his position and made his way to now where he's reached a point where he's had his meteoric rise to basically be one-on-one in the arena with Joe Biden. And of course, the whole time below, you see Klobuchar, you see Tom Steyer at 2.3, you see Pete Buttigieg at 6.7 to 7 to 8, and then you see Amy Klobuchar, you see Mike Bloomberg, who is only rising recently because Bloomberg's name is in so many people's heads because he's on every big bus bench ad, every billboard in town, on every radio station, and every non-commercial radio station, and every TV, and every supermarket, and every Walgreens saying vote for Mike Bloomberg. But even still, it's not quite enough to buy him the election. The same can be said of Tom Steyer. And now we get to a point where Biden and Sanders are basically tied. So my final thought is for this episode, one of my key takeaways is that in the beginning of time, I thought that it was very clear that Bernie Sanders was going to get the nomination because of the way he was treated in 2016. And I thought many people would lend more credibility to him because they felt like they never even gave him a chance in 2016. But then South Carolina happened. So as you're sitting here at the end of this episode, you have to think about the Democratic primary in terms of pre-South Carolina and post-South Carolina, because those are two very different dynamics. And when they're juxtaposed, you can tell that Biden, in many ways, does seem better positioned to actually be able to take on the incumbent president. And now let's go ahead and look to the polls. Let's see what the polls say. How does Senator Sanders stack up next to Trump? We've got lots of polls here from Real Clear Politics, a pretty trustworthy source in our opinion. We've got a Yahoo News YouGov poll, a Fox News poll, a CBS, an ABC, an Emerson poll, a Quinnipiac poll. And in every poll, it seems Sanders is slightly ahead of Trump, 49 to 44, 48 to 42, 49 to 42, 47 to 44, 51 to 45. Now, there are a few things we have to keep in mind, though. A, Trump underpolls because Trump is Trump and he's his own worst enemy. And a lot of times when he runs his mouth, there are people that support him that don't want to say they support him because they don't always condone, bad Trump when bad Trump comes out to play, but they like it when good Trump is around and comes out to play. So just like in 2016, Trump underpolls. So we have to keep in mind that this might not be completely indicative of how people are feeling. We also have to know how many people responded. We see, the spread here, Sanders plus 4.9, Sanders plus 6, plus 7. So, and we also have to account for margin of error. But so I think in 2016, the holy grail, the poll sort of was debunked, and people started realizing, well, polls aren't the same as an actual election. Now let's move to Biden. We've seen that Sanders relatively consistently stacks up, ahead of Trump, but let's see Trump and Biden. And Biden seems in many ways like it's an even bigger spread. We've got Biden 50 to 41, 49 to 41, 47 to 45. Quinnipiac says 50 to 43. NPR PBS Marist poll says 50 to Biden and 44 to Trump. Then our Emerson poll says 52 to 44. I'm sorry, that's 48 to 52. Interesting. So the Emerson poll is the only poll of all these polls that actually puts Trump ahead of Biden. So with a spread of Trump plus 4. So that's particularly interesting. So the final thoughts for this segment are that this has increasingly become a race of Bernie Sanders and the progressive revolution and Joe Biden, you know him, you love him, expanding what you already know and what you already like. And then, of course, the wild card Trump. And we don't know if we're going to an open convention or what will happen because a plurality is not a majority. A plurality is not a majority. So things to be looking out for in the upcoming season as California and Texas and other states finish up. See how Biden and Bernie compare because it is quite a close race. And this could be, depending on the outcome of that race between Bernie and Biden, could determine the fate of the 2020 election. Again, I want to take this minute to thank everybody who's listened. I really appreciate all the supporters. All the love and support means a lot. Me and my producer, we really, really appreciate it. If you feel inclined, if you feel generous, go ahead and give us a like if you liked it. Go ahead and give us a dislike if you didn't like it. Go ahead and drop a comment if you want to participate. Go ahead and feel free to subscribe. And if you're feeling generous, please click the link in the subscription or in the description to our Patreon page where you can become a Patreon member. We really appreciate it. Thank you and good evening.